Good morning, everyone. Just want to confirm that the sound is fine.
I can hear
And
you, Jaime. Can you hear me?
yes, thank you very
Sounds good.
much. Just want to
Okay.
confirm that this is being translated to Spanish, uh, French, and Arabic. So thank you very much to everyone. It's a pleasure to open this event that is gathering people who are worried about solving the learning crisis. My name is Jaime Saavedra. I'm the Human Development Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the World Bank. Um, the report that is being launched here today is the fourth report endorsed by the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel, which is a multidisciplinary group of education experts, academics, and policymakers that are trying to gather all the information that is available on specific issues that can move us forward in terms of improving the quality of education across the planet, particularly in low and middle income countries. And one of the, if you can move the slides, Maria, please. One of the panel's main interest is to identify best buys, right? How can we group education interventions into different tiers of cost effectiveness? Not only what works, but what works at the right cost, and what interventions have the right impact and strength of evidence. So we can have great buys, right? That are interventions that are cost effective and that there's a very strong body of evidence, or we can have good buys, which are interventions that can improve the quality of education or other education outcomes, but for which there's some evidence but about their cost effectiveness, but not as much as strong as great buys. Same thing, we also have some promising, some interventions in education that might be promising, but there's little evidence. Other interventions that might be effective, but not cost effective because they're too expensive. And others are just bad buys, things that don't work. Now, we have had several publications trying to make progress on this front, but today, the panel is endorsing a new publication, which we're excited to officially launch here today. The publication is what is that evidence shows about effective reading instruction in low and middle income countries. This is a publication that it will be out today and in the next few days in not only in English, but in French, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, and Swahili. Just let me say a few words about this specific publication. A major driver of the learning crisis we're all worried about is the lack of evidence-based instruction in classroom. The global learning crisis stems from deep-rooted failures, but the single most powerful contributor to learning is the quality of teachers' instructions. Teachers' daily practices are in turn shaped by the pedagogical approaches promoted by their education systems. And in low and middle income countries, reading instruction has not always been grounded in the best available evidence. In some cases, because of weak mechanisms for translating research into practice, in some cases because of institutional inertia, in some cases because of political influences. And failure to use evidence-based instruction is one of the main causes of the literacy crisis that we are facing. So, just to conclude this introduction, the solution is clear. Education systems must adopt teaching methods that are proven by research. And an urgent task of our systems is to implement effective evidence-based instructional programs that can make the most of all students, that can make out of students as skilled readers. And effective programs must specify exactly what they aim to teach, what skills to teach, as you're gonna see here today, like letter sounds and vocabulary, how to teach them through explicit instruction and practice, and in what order, and for how long. And this is what we're gonna be discussing today. To start the presentation of the report, I want to introduce two of my colleagues authoring this report. One is Ben Piper, who is a panel member and a Global Education Director of the Gates Foundation. Ben is based in the Foundation's Kenya's office, and Ben leads the Foundation's effort to improve foundational literacy and numeracy in low and middle income countries. And right after Ben, we are going to hear from Peggy Dubeck. Peggy is a literacy and assessment expert who has created and established the technical adequacy of literacy, math, attention, and effective instruments in multiple languages. And she has designed literacy interventions for schools, community programs, and individualized settings. So without further ado, let me pass the word to both Ben and Peggy. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Jaime, and greetings, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, and good evening. It's really a pleasure. I think Jaime and I have been working on this and thinking about this paper for more than a year. And so to have this virtual global launch is really satisfying. And I think if you look at the bottom left of this slide, it shows you all the authors who wrote the report. And I can just say that this is a really world-class list of literacy experts representing language groups from across the globe. So we're really excited to share the findings from this new report. The next slide shows you a statistic that I just can't say aloud one more time, but it probably is a number that you've seen before. But as Jaime has said, the failure to use evidence-based instruction is heartbreakingly a principal cause of this learning crisis. And some of the reasons the report makes clear is that this is because some kids start school in languages they don't understand. Some programs that do focus on literacy are emphasizing the wrong instructional areas. Some programs that do have the right instructional areas are not giving teachers enough guidance, and we're ultimately not having the kind of best packages that are included in the studies that this report draws from. But the most important thing to hear from this slide, this is a fixable problem because of what we see on the next slide, which is that no longer do we have to base all of what we do on the rich world. So the science of reading the science of reading as a body of evidence has typically been drawn from the National Reading Panel in the US or the Rose Report in the UK. And what we're trying to do humbly is update the science of reading. And I think as you read the report, you find that we have so much more evidence that updates what the science of reading means, both on particular elements of good literacy instruction, as well as full-fledged education reforms that have had meaningful impact in many low and middle income countries. So the GEEP as an overall panel has made it its mission to identify evidence, and as the first endorsed paper of the panel, it's critical to note that this issue of literacy is coming first, because we think there's enough evidence on literacy to help drive what can happen in low and middle income countries. The next slide gives you some of the data, some of the distributions. Basic idea, if you take all of these country averages, each of these represent a country average. The blue is grade 1, the yellow is grade 2, the green is grade 3. The x-axis is fluency on average at the country level, and the y-axis is the number of countries and the number of studies. What you consistently show if you bucket by grade, the grade 1 kids, there's some distribution of grade 1 in blue on the left, but the average is around 10 words a minute at the end of grade 1. If you look at grade 2, the average is around 20. Look at grade 3, the average is around 50. And if you push out according to what government benchmarks are, there are just very few countries that are at or even near benchmarks for countries. So this is a global evidence base that the World Bank worked on 2 years ago. But the basic takeaway from this figure is that the average country is not just a little bit away from where they need to be, they're substantially far from where it needs to be in low and middle income countries. So as you're listening to this paper, as you're discussing this paper at the country level, the main point to hear from us, from the authors, is that we need to substantially improve the design and construction of these learning outcomes. These programs to respond to the science of reading. So the next slide gives you a question that many of us who've worked in low and middle income countries on literacy have heard a long time. So does it even matter what the National Reading Panel has said? This is US. I'm working in Ghana. I'm working in Kenya. I'm working in Malawi. I'm working in India. This issue of how to teach reading has been a topic of research for decades, but it's this paper that has done a really recent job of bringing together papers that have, some of which have just been published over the last year, some within the last 10, to look at not just high-income countries, but low and middle-income countries. So the question is, now that we have so much more evidence, you'll see the number of studies that are new, how much of what we knew as a science of reading from the rich world, how much does it apply? And so let me tell you on behalf of the authors, one of the key points, we find that the core principles of effective reading instruction apply across diverse settings. Of course, as researchers and people who've worked in a variety of languages, there are clearly necessary adaptations to specific languages, specific cultures, but the core ideas of how you teach literacy apply. We'll talk about some of the nuances as we go through, but that's one of the main points we want to share. Next slide gives you all of the new papers that are included in this report. On the left, there's 151 studies. On the right, this represents 167 languages. You see the distribution. Sub-Saharan Africa has the plurality. You can look at the regions on the right. You can look at the type of studies on the left. We have RCTs, we have the natural experiments, we have observational studies, some meta-analyses. It's a much more robust evidence base than we've had before. The next slide tells you the structure of the report, because I know everyone's going to want to download it and get reading on it. We have the executive summary, which is kind of short, targeted, and actually helpful for the busy policymaker. The section 1 is about this global evidence and why it does apply to low and middle income countries. Section 2 is my favorite, on the 6 core skills that we'll talk about. Section 3 is on kind of policy considerations, design, implementation, etc. And then for the people who are doing PhDs or PhD recent researchers, there's a wide database of studies. And as Jaime said, we're really proud and excited that we're going to have the paper in several languages as we move forward. So the next slide tells you the ways to use the report, and I won't go through all of them, but 2 big ones to think about is if you have a reading program, a literacy program in your country or a country you care about, how do you compare what that program is doing against what the evidence says? And if you're thinking about investing in a new one, starting with the best evidence. So it's a tool both for governments, tool for implementers who are on the coalface, for academics, and for funders to consider funding evidence-based programs. The next slide maybe tells you a second key thing I would like you to remember from my portion of this talk before we get to the star of the day, who's Peggy after me. Reading is based on 2 core skills. This goes to the simple view of reading: decoding and language comprehension. These 2 things are both required and they both are interacting. So decoding, to remind you, is the ability to recognize written symbols, letters, alphasyllabaries, very different types across our languages, but those symbols convert to sounds, and those sounds make it easier for you to recognize words. And this issue of decoding is inclusive of phonics, even though the type of phonics will differ by country. On the right, language comprehension, it means it examines whether or not we understand the meaning of words, sentences, and texts. And we want to make sure that people know that the coding and comprehension skills are constantly interacting. Both are essential. Without both, reading won't happen, but they make it easier as they go together. Without decoding, readers cannot recognize words. Without comprehension, they cannot grasp their meaning. Both are required. The next slide is maybe my favorite. This is, I think, one of the most important contributions to the evidence base that this paper is providing. Kids need systematic and explicit instruction in 6 areas. And this is a departure from the National Reading Panel, which had 5. So we recommend 6 skills. And again, from the slide above, to develop the decoding and language comprehension skills required, children need explicit and systematic instruction in these core skills: oral language, listening, speaking, vocabulary, as Jaime said. This is essential for children to understand. Many kids, all kids actually develop some oral language naturally, but it can be and should be boosted during classroom instruction, particularly in languages that are not the first language of the children, which is the case for many countries. Phonological awareness is a second one, which is the ability to identify and manipulate the sounds in spoken language. This notion that words orally can be broken into individual sounds underpins the alphabetic principle is important for the next one, which is systematic phonics instruction. So let's be clear. The report is very specific that phonics is important. A phonics component is a part of effective instruction on these new literacy programs that follow the evidence. It is not exclusive. So here is on both sides. It is a necessary but insufficient component, and any good program should have 6 skills, not 1. But in many cases, there's not been enough phonics instruction to help kids recognize the relationships between letters and sounds and how letters combine to form words. I work in East Africa. The types of phonics instruction will differ based on the languages we're working in. So there are many languages of syllabic. You have to both have the letter sound, combine that into syllables. My wife is from Ethiopia, speaking the beautiful language of Amharic. That's an alpha syllabary. It's a very different style, but there needs to be language-specific phonics instruction. The fourth one is reading fluency. This is where it gets fun. We have the opportunity to have kids reading text accurately, automatically, and with proper expression, prosody. But this is also the place we give kids the chance to read stories they like, about characters they're interested in, and imagine and grow. So our paper really makes clear that fluency is important, but it's not robotic, just reading words. It's the fun engagement with stories that are about the communities and settings that these kids are interested in. Fifth is where it all comes together, reading comprehension. This includes retelling, prediction, ideas, mind maps. This is not easy to teach. We definitely need more progress on this, but it's the goal of all we do. And I think a big contribution of this paper is the last one, writing. There's emerging evidence from low and middle income countries about the importance of writing. This includes forming letters, spelling words, composing texts. Writing instruction, the evidence says, plays an important role in learning to read and helps children develop the other core school skills. And it helps with decoding, and decoding helps with spelling. These things are connected. The next slide gives you a little bit about the how, which is, and if you're going to take those 6 areas, how do I do it? Maybe I'm convinced I need to do the 6 things, but how? The paper argues that there's 3 main elements for how. Explicit, teachers need the support. I was a teacher, well trained, but still when I got to my first classroom, I needed some support, a teacher's guide that showed me how to do these elements in my classroom. The second one is systematic. These books and materials should be beautiful and attractive and colorful, but underneath it should be a big spreadsheet so that there's a systematic, science-based method to this, logical and developmentally appropriate order that kids are getting, following a plan, scope, and sequence, and comprehensive. As you're thinking about your program or your partner's program, all these core skills need to be covered, and weaknesses in any of these single areas can hinder reading. We're getting to the end of my comments. The next slide says some specific things that you can do if you want to make progress on moving forward. Number 1, how does the program or your country align with this evidence? Making sure there's, as I said, explicit, systematic, and comprehensive instruction. Maybe you've skipped a subskill, or maybe you've de-emphasized a subskill. You can look in more depth in the paper to see how this would work. And critically, tailoring instruction to the language characteristics. The second one is making sure that you are responding to the evidence about language of instruction. There's clear evidence that children learn to read best in the language they speak at home. Therefore, it's important, if that's difficult, to make sure that there are choices on choosing the most appropriate language of instruction and then giving children the support they need to learn to read in that language. Obviously, first language is better, but there is work in this paper and evidence about how to design second language programs in case that's what's happening in your country. The third point, to close with this, supporting teachers with the practical tools. High quality teaching materials for students, for teachers, some sort of teacher's guide, lesson plan, some skills-based training, so they're actually practicing the lesson routine on comprehension and how to do phonological awareness and phonics, and then the ongoing PD to make this all possible. So I'm going to turn this over now to Peggy, the star of the show, but thank you so much for taking a look at this paper, and we're excited to see what happens at the country level. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Ben. Maria, if you could go, thanks, you already went to the next slide. It's really nice to be here to bring to life some of the findings, and I look forward to continuing interaction with all of you about how to respond, and I'm sure all the other authors on this great team of authors is I'm presenting on behalf of all of them. Next slide, please. I'd like to start off by talking about how humans are new to reading. We have a large orange box there on the outside to the right, and this represents the roughly 135,000 years that we as humans have had the genetic capacity to speak. And that middle blue box represents the roughly 100,000 years that we've actually been speaking. And that much smaller gray box down there in the corner represents the just 5,000 years that we humans have been writing and therefore reading. So comparatively, humans have been writing for a really short amount of time. And this really helps to explain why reading isn't a natural process and instruction is needed. Next slide, please. So universally, reading means connecting language with print to understand meaning. This is what Ben was talking about earlier. But learning doesn't just happen naturally. We need to provide children with the systematic and explicit instruction so they do read with comprehension. Next slide. These 6 hexagons just summarize the skills that need to be addressed in instruction. Ben's already gone through these. I'm just showing them to you in a different layout, and I'm going to try to get through all 6 of them with you today. Next slide, please. So oral language. It's the capacity to really understand and use language for communication. This is one of the founding sides of the simple view of reading. And it's essential for children to understand the words they read, and this can be boosted through classroom activities like this read aloud that we're showing here. Next slide. So I'm about to show you a text, and just for fun, I know we have people on this call that are listening in Arabic, some are listening in French, some are listening in Spanish. And I'm about to show you a text in English, and at your own space, I want you, based on what you're available to do, I'd like you to read this to yourself out loud. I'm going to read it out loud, and you can hear me read, but I just want you to read it out loud. Give it a try to decode it. So for a long time, Haro, the nymph Thisbin, was the only Thisbin in the Zot. Every midsea, he would cond and rend. So I couldn't hear all of you, but I'm assuming that those of you that gave it a try, you most likely decoded the words correctly, or most of them. You might have stumbled on a few. But I want you to think about what's happening in this passage. You have an idea that probably something's happening in the past and something's happening with some regularity. But your lack of vocabulary is probably interfering with your full understanding. So now let's examine the passage again. Could you click to the next slide, please? And click again. Okay, so now those orange words have now been replaced by words that likely you are familiar to many of you. We know that Haro's a little pig, and he's in a pen, and he's cond and running actually means roll and play. So now what's happening? You can think, Haro's probably getting dusty. He might be getting muddy. And you're able to extend beyond what's actually in the text by having an understanding of the words that are in there. If you could click to the next one, and you can click 2 times. So now I'm going to do a little word analysis here. So phonological awareness begins with that Greek root phone, P-H-O-N, highlighted there in orange. And this is, I'm wanting to highlight this because I'm going to contrast it to another finding. And this is the ability to identify and manipulate sounds in spoken language. And in instruction, it's really fun because at the beginning, kids are playing with really large units of language, such as rhyming words like the French words mon beau. But then it's advancing to smaller units, such as noticing that the words like petit and poisson both begin with the same sound. And this notion that words can be broken into smaller units and often individual sounds underpins learning the concept that print represents speech and carries meaning. Can we click the next slide? And so phonics also includes that Greek root of phone, P-H-O-N. But now we're not just focusing on sound. Now we're talking about the relationship between the sounds and the symbols and how to combine them to read real words. And without phonics, some children are just forced to read whole words. Sometimes you maybe have been in classrooms where you hear children just pointing at a word, pointing at girl and just saying girl, girl. But they don't have any mechanism or any skills on how to approach a word with the same pattern, like the word twirl. And so showing them how to combine parts of word is fundamental to phonics. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to show them, like this word fan, we're showing them these individual sounds on how to blend them to read a word. And if you click one more time, but later, after they've learned how to read a syllable, they're then learning how to combine syllables, as in to read a longer word like fantastic. So as Ben has really highlighted, and I want to emphasize, phonics is central to effective instruction, but it's not exclusive. Next slide, please. So reading fluency has three main components, which largely summarize how reading skills develop. It begins with accuracy, moves on to effortless word identification, which is approaching natural speech, and then it finally ends with expression, showing that the reader is monitoring meaning. And it can be done through interactive activities like these two girls shown here. Next slide, please. And as we're really excited to talk about writing in this paper because it has a reciprocal relationship to reading, and it's highly instructionally transparent. So spelling is going to support phonics, and writing is going to support ideas. And here we have a Spanish example of a little boy titling his brother the Black Cat. And as I mentioned, it's highly instructionally transparent, and the meaning would really change quite a bit if he had included a verb or a comma. And that's where sometimes a teacher can interact with a child and try to figure out what it is what's the meaning they're trying to get across. Next slide, please. So finally, we get to what we're all trying to do when we're getting kids to read. We want to understand what we're reading. And it relies on both strategies, some of which Ben mentioned, and it also relies on knowledge to make sense of what's read. And to see the role of knowledge, I'm going to ask you this time to read some texts again, but this time you can just read these to yourself. We have text here in an orange box and a blue box, and I'll just give you some time to read these to yourself and think about what you read. So some of you may have more knowledge about the box, about the text in the text in box one in the orange box. This is about a baseball game, and you're likely able to fill in what wasn't said by the author, such as the bases were loaded, and if bases are loaded, and you can get a run by just getting onto base. But while others of you may have more knowledge about text too, this is about the cricket match. You can fill in what the batter is possibly thinking, that they don't just need to do anything risky, that they just need to do a soft, controlled shot to score the winning run. So instruction can teach these strategies, but really the best way to develop knowledge to distinguish these kinds of texts is through wide reading and wide experiences. Next slide. So we have these 6 skills in place. This is fantastic, but we still have, and we discuss this quite a bit in the paper, are the design and implementation principles that need to be considered. So, because if they're not considered, even technically sound programs can struggle. So these blue boxes here on the left represent the core concepts of structured pedagogy, that it's training, lesson plans and materials that Ben talked about earlier, and then the ongoing support that the adult gets. But those three things aren't enough. Those things have to have those 6 skills. So I'm highlighting that here in orange to show you that we need to have those skills there. So all of this has to really work in harmony. A second design and implementation consideration that we spend quite a bit of time on the paper is talking about the language of instruction. So looking on this right side of the slide, there could be a language match where the LOI, the language of instruction, represented here in orange, matches all the children's strongest languages, and they're represented by their orange faces. This is kind of the ideal scenario. But very common around all the world, across all income levels, are heterogeneous classrooms, where children speak a myriad of languages, as represented here by, in the middle, by some blue and orange and green faces, and only some of the children's strongest language matches the language of instruction. And also quite common is the bottom row, where the language of instruction, represented here by the blue, is not spoken really by any of the children. And so none of these green faces can be language models for the other. So for initial reading instruction, it's really preferred and more efficient if children learn in a language that they already know. But yet logistically, we know that this is challenging. And so systems need to provide more time and more resources when there is a language mismatch. And then the third principle that for a design and implementation to be successful is the programming needs to be aligned with government priorities. Next slide, please. So we also discussed that there's a policy and an investment case to be following the evidence. So when children learn to read early and efficiently, they don't spend years and we don't spend resources on remediation, repetition, and dropout. High quality instruction saves money. It's really quite cost effective. And we also talk about how this isn't just theory. So we discuss places like Sobral in Brazil and Tusome in Kenya that have shown that it's achievable to do real world improvement at scale. And reading results really depend on adult decisions to align the instruction to the evidence and attend to the implementation quality, which really fundamentally means supporting teachers if they're not doing some of these things already. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the science is really quite clear. We cite over 150 studies just from low and middle income countries that show support for developing the 6 skills that we described earlier. And the path to literate children is by aligning policy with systems. Progress has really been made, but we need to continue to follow the evidence and until all children are independent readers and writers. And next slide just shows some references for just this particular section. And we'll move on. Oh, sorry. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Without further ado, as we're running a bit out of time, let me pass the baton to João Pedro Azevedo. João Pedro is Chief of Statistician and Deputy Director for Data and Analytics at UNICEF. And João Pedro's focus, not only in this job, but I think throughout his decades of experience, has been on leveraging data analytics to shape impactful child welfare strategies. So over to you, JP, to moderate the panel.
Thank you very much, Jaime and colleagues. First of all, to congratulate the authors for this great initiative. And this is certainly a huge contribution to the debate and for us all to tackle learning poverty. I will first like to introduce the panel. I think we have a great discussion, lots of experience here. We will be joined here today by both Rob Jenkins and Martin Benavides. Martin is the director of IP UNESCO, and in this role, he provides strategic leadership for the Institute. Martin is a Peruvian sociologist who has served as the Minister of Education at the onset of the COVID pandemic in 2020 and oversaw the country's pre-primary, primary, secondary, higher education, and helped design the national strategies for distance education in response to the pandemic. And between 2018 and 2020, he served as head of the Peru's National Superintendents of Higher Education and the regulatory body for Peru's university systems. And today he'll be joining us to contribute to the panel. And we'll also be joined by Rob Jenkins, who brings over 30 years of experience in international development and humanitarian programming in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Prior to his current appointment at Harvard Graduate School of Education, he has served as the Global Director of Education and Adolescent Development at UNICEF from 2019 to 2024, also covering the period of the pandemic. He joined UNICEF in '95 and served as representative in Jordan and deputy director of the Division of Policy and Strategy in UNICEF headquarters. So together we have here, 50 years of experience in the field, and we're really looking forward to your views and comments on this.
We'll be joining later, JP, also by Minister Torrendell.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, and I'll be, thank you, Jaime. So Jaime, and Robert, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind, and really kind of get your view based on the experience that you have working in many governments, supporting the transformation of educational policies, including literacy, and your role now at Harvard, and the opportunities to shape research, right? Would really like to hear kind of what system supports have been most important to make improvements in literacy level, and especially middle and low-income country settings, right? If you can give us some examples of countries that have been successful with that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thanks, JP. Let me also congratulate the authors for this very impressive report. It's great to be here with friends and colleagues, and I'm just thrilled to be part of this discussion, and just optimistic about the positive impact this report and the continuing work of the Global Education Evidence Advisory Panel will continue to have on the sector. So amazing work and amazing contribution. I'll be brief I look forward to hearing from others and continuing the conversation, but I come into this conversation, and Jaime mentioned a little bit at the beginning, and the report mentions we are at a state, and Ben also mentioned with a famous statistic, but I just want to reiterate, we are at a point of crisis, a global learning crisis. There is need for large-scale, systemic, transformative change to address this crisis. So my comments will be from that perspective. I would say, to answer your question, looking across countries, what has shown the greatest success, just to build on the report, but just to add a little bit additional thoughts, I'm going to offer 5 key characteristics of countries that have indeed transformed their education systems to address the learning crisis or showing promise. One is leadership. Countries that have shown focused, consistent leadership to address the learning crisis, to promote foundational learning, have indeed shown great success. That would seem like potentially a truism. Those who have leadership will, those who don't would perform less. But I just want to reiterate, leadership is absolutely key. Leadership at the very top level, ministers, heads of state, to ensure allocation of resources, prioritization, but also leadership through down the system. Technocrats, senior technocrats down to superintendents, principals, teachers. So leadership. Number 2, alignment. And the World Bank has written a lot about this, but I think we just want to, and others, but the system needs to align to that leadership, and a lack of alignment, deprioritization at any one of the levels that results in disalignment constrains progress. So focused leadership and alignment through down the system to translate that leadership into practice. Third, and it's mentioned in the report, which I just want to just emphasize in a sense, but sufficient support and incentives and accountability mechanisms, ultimately to teachers. As has been reiterated in the report, it all comes down to quality of instruction. That requires sufficient support and incentivizing that, if you'd like, practice, and also having accountability mechanisms at all levels. We see countries that do put those mechanisms in place accelerate and show greater promise. Number 4, I just want to emphasize feedback loops. And JP, you're an expert in this, but monitoring systems, how do we information flow up and down the system from the student to the teacher, teacher to the student, all the way up to the head of school, to the superintendent. And so a flow of information and corrective action. I think Sobral was probably the most famous example. It's raised in the report, but it's been raised for many years, of the importance of feedback loops and monitoring and corrective action. And the last, I think the fifth point I'd raise is countries that have shown greater promise have a focus on addressing inequities or promoting equity. And that means understanding those children which are marginalized, despite the average showing a crisis, meaning 7 out of 10 children in low and middle income countries are not achieving minimum foundational learning standards. But if we unpack that average, we have growing inequities. So those countries that do prioritize reaching the most marginalized, allocate resources accordingly, and there's been some great work by UNICEF and others on a benefit incidence analysis, which showed which countries have allocated more resources to those children who would benefit most from limited resources, show greater promise. So let me just throw out those 5 points. In terms of examples, just to say, I think it's fair to say we have some, and they're mentioned in the report, often cited overall examples of countries, but I think we also have examples of countries which have advanced in certain areas of those 5 and other areas, which we can learn a lot from. Back to you, JP.
Thank you so much, Rob. And if I may ask you, any ideas on from a research perspective, what are the key gaps and kind of new research trends that you see as opportunities for those, to further in this?
Sure. Well, I think, and many of the panel members and myself and others have been wrestling with this, but I think a key question is, the report talks about in the previous, aligning policy and systems, but I think actually the key is we need to further work through what are the systemic changes, the changes at scale, and maybe the sequencing of those changes that are showing best practice. So, for example, if I was a newly appointed minister, I want to address the learning crisis, I'm highly committed. Where's the playbook that helps me to facilitate my decision making to make these big changes? What is the sequencing that I should be following to achieve those best practices? The report, I think, very clearly articulates what has to happen at classroom level, best practice science and reading, but enabling the often tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of teachers, tens of thousands of schools to implement such practice. Where's my playbook to walk me through that process based on best practices? So that I'm looking forward to continuing to engage with and encourage others to. Secondly, I do want to just flag equity again. I think we need more focus in research and a better understanding of in which context, which children, from the report mentions children that have a mother tongue that's not offered in the school system, but also children living in remote locations, children with different levels of ability, children living in extremely poor households, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are best practices that can promote equity? Third, technology. It's mentioned in the report. We all talk about technology. JP, as we also all know, technology is moving faster than research is. I think as soon as you even think about, I'm going to write a paper or a book on AI, your book's out of date, or your ideas are out of date because there's a new tool. So I think that's going to be a continued space of research. How can technology be leveraged to promote such large-scale systems change? And the last is contextual factors. Ben mentioned it. What parts of this report, the science of reading, the systems change, are generic or are kind of principles that are universal, and what parts of the country, what indicators, what contextual factors need to be taken into consideration to enable these best practices in each context. Thanks, JP.
Thank you so much, Rob. So now, Martin, lots of interesting ideas here that you throw at the group. But Martin, the International Institute for Education and Planning at UNESCO recently published a report on the role of the middle tier, right, or the group of professionals that serve as the link between the policymakers and the teachers, and who serve as the essential functions in the management and planning of the educational system, right? And Rob just mentions the system as being one of the critical areas for work. It would be great to hear from you. What roles do you think this middle tier play to implement and sustain the evidence-based literacy programs? And have you seen some examples there as well of what has worked well? Please.
Thank you for your question, and let me also congratulate to the authors and organization that made this publication possible. I think it's very critical and important that these documents are produced because they not only gather the best evidence, but also they boldly propose an argument based on the best information available. We know that evidence is not always conclusive, so some risks should be taken, and I think this publication goes in the right direction in that sense. No? Also, let me say an additional thing that I found important in the publication. I think that this report also positions literacy as an essential component of the right to education. So children who cannot read are denied of a human right, the right to education. This is a very critical alert, and I think that the combination of two kinds of traditional thought, human rights and, in this case, the science of learning, in a single argument is very strategic to build a reinforced consensus in order to advance in the proposed argument. So I think these two things are very important to remark. Then entering to the question, I think that one of the important contribution of the publication, it's also that it put the learning and what happened in the classroom at the center. From national policies, it's very difficult to get into what happens in the classroom. And we know, and this is something that has been said before, that if the reforms do not get into the classrooms, they no longer exist. So middle tier, in that sense, the middle tier, the group of professionals playing different roles and being in the middle between the national policies and classroom interventions are very strategic to try to build that relationship between the policies and the practice. From research that have been done in the institute, but also in other organizations, there are a group of strategic things that the middle tier can support. First, they can provide pedagogical support for school and teaching improvement. The middle tier can play an important role of offering this support, especially where teachers lack robust professional teacher training. So it's very important in that sense that the middle tier engage into the different policies to support what the capacities at the classroom level. Also, the middle tier can play an important role in promoting professional collaboration within and across schools. There is a lot of evidence about the importance of schools working together to promote change, and the middle tier can play a role in looking for that articulation. Then also thinking about evidence, the middle tier can play a role in brokering knowledge to produce the use of evidence for those who are in the practice. Is not very easy to access evidence, and the middle tier actors, agents can help to identify the evidence and put that evidence close to those who are playing a role as teachers in the classroom. Also, the middle tier can play an important role in what Rob was proposing, the idea of looking for system alignment. The middle tier, in that sense, play an important role in the intersection between central policy making and local implementation of policy. So that's another interesting role, an important role. And finally, we know that, these general arguments need to be contextualized at the local level, and the middle tier can play an important role in helping to test innovations and scaling up promising practices.
Thank you so much, Martin. And if I may do a quick follow-up, and I'm glad to see that Dr. Carlos has been able to join us, and we'll be turning to him after. But we'd like to hear from you, Martin, based on your experience as a former Minister of Education. What would you say are the biggest challenge, or is the biggest challenge, or the biggest challenges that a leader have to overcome to implement this kind of reforms?
Well,
very briefly, if you may, it's a challenge.
You can help to answer that question also, but from experience, at least there are two important issues to solve. One is to try to build an important coalition. Gaining consensus before reform is very politically important. That doesn't mean that everyone should agree on the policy, because the policies that are transforming education will affect some interest, but at least you have to gain important levels of consensus in order to try to make a change. That consensus should come from a range of different actors, from within the system, but also outside the system. If you have public opinion from your side, is inclusive better to support reforms and change that are going to be touching some interests that are more resistant to change. And secondly, I think it's very important to have, as important as to have a very sound policies and ideas, is to have a very strong implementation framework, that at least can have 4 characteristics. One is anticipating capacity early on, so to try to ensure that reforms are realistic in terms of resource, feasibility, leadership, and political legitimacy, to embedding mechanisms for feedback and adjustment. So there's a lot of changes that can happen during the implementation of one specific reform, and it's important to be able to have the correct mechanisms to be able to adjust what need to be adjusted in the process of implementation. Then, as we just said, empowering actors at every level, particularly at the middle tier, which connects, as we said, national reforms agenda with local schools, but also supports continuing learning through different stakeholder participation, trying to align people and institutions through good dialogue and transparency. And finally, which is something that is very important, I think that Rob just mentioned it, is adapting the reform to the context, no? Strengthening system coherence and aligning policies and institutions with local realities and governance structures. Okay.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I'm pleased to see Dr. Carlos Torrendel, the Secretary of Education from the Ministry of Human Capital of Argentina, has been able to join us. And Dr. Carlos, I would like to start by really thanking you. I know you're in a very busy schedule and have been able to come and join us. And I will do a brief introduction here. Dr. Carlos has been serving as a Secretary of Education of Argentina since 2023, appointed by the President Milei. He works under the Ministry of Human Capital and holds a bachelor degree in education science from the Pontificia Católica University of Argentina. Also has a doctorate in education from the Pontificia Católica University of Chile, where he obtained his qualification as specialist in education. And throughout his academic career, he has taught in various pedagogy-related programs at these institutions. And Dr. Torrendel, if I may just jump right in the question that we have for you, which is in 2024, all 24 provinces of Argentina signed up to a national literacy plan as a commitment to improve literacy levels across the country. Can you tell us a bit more about this national plan and explain how you are incentivizing the provinces which have, in the case of Argentina, the primary responsibility for pre-university degree in the federal system? And how do you see the implementations of the actions that are taking place on the ground are aligned with the evidence for improving literacy outcomes? Thank you. And please use Spanish as well if it's we have live translation today, so please feel free. Thank you.
Hola, muchas gracias. Bueno, un honor enorme participar un rato al menos de este panel. Lamento no haber podido escuchar previamente ni lo que viene ahora porque logramos insertar la participación mía en el medio o entre varias reuniones de las que lamentablemente no pude apartarme. Hemos conversado mucho con Jaime Saavedra, quien también conoce desde el principio. Me reuní con Jaime antes de asumir el 10 de diciembre del 2023. Fue una de las primeras reuniones que tuve antes de entrar en funciones, así que conoce bastante junto con otros. Bueno, también con Martín hemos estado en varias oportunidades, en algunas oportunidades. Así que en ese sentido hay como una relación ya con el Banco Mundial y con otros organismos internacionales establecida desde aquel momento. Entonces mi respuesta sintética tendría algunos elementos que serían los siguientes. Primero, previamente a la llegada del gobierno de Milei, Argentinos por la Educación, que es una asociación civil relevante de la Argentina, una una asociación de la sociedad civil, venía ya insistiendo con el tema de alfabetización. Por otro lado, las evaluaciones venían mostrando un deterioro en lengua y en matemática también, pero en lengua particularmente en todas las evaluaciones, tanto PISA como también ERCE y también las pruebas Aprender, que son las pruebas nacionales de nuestro país. Entonces, claramente ahí hay un desafío que teníamos que estaba ya marcado en los 3 niveles de evaluaciones estandarizadas. Entonces, en ese sentido, había un consenso previo, ese consenso previo de la sociedad estaba de alguna manera materializado, y cuando, me ofrecen pocos días antes de asumir el gobierno la posibilidad de integrar el Ministerio de Capital Humano como secretario de Educación, en la reunión que tuvimos con la ministra Sandra Petovelo, yo también coincidía con que alfabetización era un desafío sin duda prioritario, y se lo planteé como propuesta entre 4 o 5 elementos más, una primera hoja de ruta a la ministra, y y efectivamente ella concordó, luego se dialogó con el presidente, también concordaron, el presidente había firmado durante la campaña un compromiso por la alfabetización, y de esa manera se logró, si se quiere, un primer acuerdo muy rápido dentro del gobierno. Eso se llevó al Consejo Federal de Educación, que es el organismo en la Argentina que agrupa a los 24 ministros provinciales, presididos en este caso por mí, como secretario de Educación, y en la primera reunión que presidía yo con el nuevo gobierno, en un contexto de mucha incertidumbre, recordarán que el presidente ya durante la campaña había sido muy radical en torno de la política fiscal, etcétera, que había llegado adelante, lo cual preveía una situación de ajuste importante, que fue lo que luego pasó, aún en un escenario que se preveía y luego fue bastante radical en términos de una valiente política de orden de las cuentas públicas. Se planteó a todos los ministros esta posibilidad de focalizarnos en ello, y en esa reunión ya informalmente hubo un acuerdo unánime de que ese era el camino. En febrero se volvió a hacer otra reunión, las reuniones son 10, 11 anuales con todos los ministros, se volvió a hacer otra reunión y efectivamente, ya en febrero nosotros logramos aprobar un primer documento marco de la Política Nacional de Alfabetización por unanimidad de las 24 provincias. Destaco además que ninguna de las provincias es gobernada por el partido que gobierna la nación, aún en el día de hoy, o sea que es otro fenómeno, si se quiere, a resaltar, que el gobierno que gobierna el Estado argentino nacional no tiene, por el momento, ningún gobierno provincial. Más allá de que tiene relaciones distintas, obviamente, con los distintos partidos, pero ninguno responde directamente al gobierno nacional. Así que en febrero se aprobó ese documento marco y ya en mayo se aprobó el Compromiso Nacional por la Alfabetización, que incluyó el Plan Nacional con los 24 planes provinciales anexos, que son públicos y se encuentran en la página, en el sitio del Consejo Federal de Educación. Bueno, entonces para tal vez ir redondeando la primera respuesta, a mí me parece que se dio un clima de época, o sea, no se puede, digamos, dejar de mencionar que había un cierto clima de época que de alguna manera venía consolidándose previamente. Hubo mucha generosidad de todas las partes, de todas las provincias y de la nación para encontrarnos en un desafío pedagógico, dejando de lado múltiples conflictos que se podrían haber desarrollado o desacuerdos que se podrían haber desarrollado, aún en torno del problema de los métodos, cosa que me referiré tal vez probablemente en la segunda parte de mi intervención. Y hubo también un liderazgo nuestro, Martín hacía algunas referencias recién, hubo también un liderazgo nuestro que se concentró en lo pedagógico, y a partir de una Secretaría de Educación que el gobierno permitió organizar, que es una Secretaría de Educación, yo diría, fuertemente con una visión centrada en lo educativo, más que en lo político partidario o en otros debates que a veces no es prudente de introducir si uno quiere realmente focalizarse en los aprendizajes de los chicos, en los aprendizajes fundamentales, que ese es el centro de nuestra política. Entonces yo diría como primera respuesta, no sé si es suficiente, como primera respuesta, que me parece que se dio un conjunto de elementos: sociedad civil, Estado nacional, estados provinciales, una actitud de apertura, de generosidad, de construcción de confianza. En eso también hemos sido muy cuidadosos de todo lo que trabajamos con las provincias, hacerlo por igual. Hemos sobrecuidado la relación con las provincias para generar confianza no solo en el nivel de los ministros, sino en cada nivel de los funcionarios, y eso permeó todo el sistema. Creemos que llegó hasta las escuelas, y la Argentina en estos 2 años, pese a los desafíos económicos que tiene por delante, que son enormes, por supuesto, más allá de que ya hay un primer triunfo en la baja fuerte de la inflación, no obstante eso, en un contexto complejo se logró, cumpliendo acuerdos en todos los casos y teniendo una relación óptima, un liderazgo nacional y de las provincias que fue convergente. Yo daría esta como una primera respuesta, no sé si es suficiente.
No, súper, muy claro. Muchas gracias, Dr. Rendell. And this is super interesting as it touches upon a number of the elements that Rob mentioned in the beginning in terms of leadership, alignment, incentives, and so on. And if we may kind of do a brief follow-up, which is in this last year of implementation, right? What have been the main lessons that your team and you have learned from this experience, right? And what do you think it will take for the National Literacy Plan to produce sustainable results in the long run? Thank you.
Bueno, 3 o 4 elementos nuevamente. Primer elemento, por la naturaleza de este gobierno, que es un gobierno de un Estado federal, esto es lo primero que hay que señalar. Hay pocos estados federales en el mundo, uno de ellos la Argentina, más allá de las características particulares del federalismo argentino. No obstante, la gobernanza, el gobierno de los sistemas educativos, en la educación básica, llamemos así, desde el nivel inicial hasta el terciario no universitario, pertenece a las provincias, tanto la propiedad de las escuelas como la supervisión de la educación privada. Por lo tanto, nosotros teníamos claro también desde la visión del gobierno que es una visión donde, por supuesto, el Estado nacional es el último garante del derecho a la educación, pero no creemos en el centralismo, respetamos el federalismo y consideramos que la función clave del Estado está articulada sobre la base del principio de subsidiariedad. O sea, el protagonismo tiene que ser de las escuelas y de los estados provinciales, y sí, por supuesto, nuestra función clave es la coordinación, la articulación, el fortalecimiento, el acompañamiento, justamente para que nadie se quede atrás. Eso implica también aceptar algo que puede ser motivo de debate, pero que el gobierno lo tuvo claro desde el inicio, que nosotros de ninguna manera podemos imponer ni contenidos ni métodos de enseñanza, que creemos que eso es responsabilidad de las escuelas y ulteriormente de las provincias. Nosotros creemos que los métodos y las formas de enseñar y de aprender es algo que deben definirse en el nivel institucional, y a lo sumo las provincias tendrán mayor responsabilidad. Eso nos llevó a, de entrada, plantear que el gobierno nacional no iba a ir por la querella de los métodos, llamémoslo así, más allá que por supuesto hubo críticas de un lado y del otro, sino que nosotros íbamos a plantear una política en donde, en todo caso, la elección de los métodos, de las perspectivas teóricas, etcétera, es una responsabilidad de las provincias y en particular de las escuelas, aunque hoy el centralismo provincial sigue tal vez poniendo el foco en las provincias y no tanto en la responsabilidad de cada una de las escuelas. En ese escenario, eso, por un lado, puede ser criticado, porque entiendo perfectamente en el contexto de este panel, que por supuesto hay evidencia científica que abona más para determinados métodos que para otros, o conjuntos de métodos que para otros, pero no nos corresponde en un correcto concepto de libertad educativa y libertad de enseñanza a nosotros desde el Estado Nacional definir el método exacto que un docente tiene que aplicar o en cada escuela o en cada aula. Eso tuvo una gran ventaja, que fue que de alguna manera derribó la barrera de la desconfianza, porque en un momento se pensó que íbamos a ir con un método que íbamos a imponer nacionalmente. Entonces, eso generó una dinámica de construcción de confianza en donde las provincias pudieron ir, siguen hoy experimentando. Por supuesto, también tendrán que dar cuenta de sus experimentos y de sus opciones, eso está claro, y eso es lo que irá pasando en la medida que los resultados de las evaluaciones vayan mostrando los progresos o no de las distintas provincias. Y a su vez, sí, nosotros creemos que los métodos estructurados son obviamente más eficientes a la hora del aprendizaje de la lectura, y nosotros desde ya, en todo lo que es capacitación, materiales, etcétera, aconsejamos, promovemos, etcétera, sin que eso signifique que estamos cerrados solamente a una sola perspectiva de análisis. Entonces, para concluir este primer punto, yo diría, fue absolutamente relevante para que la política de alfabetización pueda existir, que nosotros no hayamos sido centralistas ni uniformizadores en materia de un planteo de método. Sí, con el tiempo iremos trabajando, por supuesto, y lo estamos planteando, porque también las evidencias van mostrando resultados, pero eso creemos que no lo podíamos hacer dogmáticamente de entrada, sino que en todo caso tiene que ser fruto de un trabajo conjunto en donde se vayan dando resultados y esos resultados vayan hablando y convenciendo por sí mismos a cada una de las provincias y a las escuelas. Entonces, ese para nosotros fue un elemento fundamental. El otro elemento fundamental, a mi modo de ver, es que tal vez nosotros tenemos que preocuparnos no solo por los métodos de lectoescritura, sino por los métodos de la política educativa de alfabetización. Entonces, acá viene el punto, me parece, determinante, que es que de lo que se trata no es de que nosotros solo militemos métodos, sino que nosotros militemos, encaremos, lideremos un método de política educativa que a nuestro modo de ver tiene que tener una serie de elementos que algunos de ustedes seguramente compartirán y que no son novedosos, sí son tal vez novedosos de ejecutar, sobre todo en un país federal. Primero, un trabajo en red permanente con todos los funcionarios provinciales, con reuniones bilaterales y reuniones grupales que hacemos casi 2 o 3 veces por mes con todos los equipos de todas las 24 provincias, con un método de trabajo de planeamiento que implica que nosotros les estamos enseñando a liderar una política de alfabetización con sus escuelas, con un trabajo centrado en una capacitación no teórica, sino práctica y metódica para poderle brindar a los docentes de las escuelas que están participando. Aclaro que hay 23.000 más o menos escuelas primarias en la Argentina. Nosotros nos hemos focalizado, más allá de que la política es para todos, particularmente en fortalecer un tercio, unas 7.000 casi, que son las que tenían resultados más débiles. Eso implica entonces una fuerte intervención de capacitación con los funcionarios, con los supervisores de las escuelas, con los directores y finalmente con los docentes, siempre en un diálogo y en un trabajo conjunto con las provincias. Esto genera un sistema, yo lo llamo así, podría utilizarse otra imagen, como de una de cataratas que se van sucediendo, y eso va de alguna manera articulando los distintos niveles de intervención pero no a partir de una bajada de línea centralista, sino de la promoción de la participación por parte de los actores, pero nunca abandonándonos, sino todo lo contrario, no se los abandona, sino que se los acompaña subsidiariamente, y en esa relación de confianza, los equipos van cada vez solicitando mayor información, formación, elementos, recursos, etcétera, y todo eso se les va brindando en ese proceso. Entonces yo diría, la lección para mí fundamental es que hacer política educativa no es repartir tecnología, repartir recursos, repartir materiales, repartir capacitación. Hacer política educativa de alfabetización que implica un cambio en las prácticas cotidianas de trabajo de los docentes y un cambio que tiene que ser desarrollado en equipo, implica necesariamente un proceso de metódico de acompañamiento, de orientación permanente y constante, no solo a determinado nivel de funcionarios, sino interviniendo en todos los niveles, siempre, insisto, de acuerdo y con participación de las provincias, pero interviniendo simultáneamente en varios niveles en un trabajo cooperativo. Yo daría, me parece que esas dos claves como una respuesta, faltarían muchos otros elementos, pero por lo menos me animaría a ir por allí.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. And and I would like to thank our panelists, Rob, Martin, and Carlos for the great conversation. And as Rob said in the beginning, this is a conversation to be continued, and we hope to carry this forward. I'm sure we will. And now I would like to pass the baton to Rachel Glenister, who will take us to the last session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to the panelists. There are some questions in the chat. We only have a few minutes, so I'm going to draw one common theme for them, which is, what do you do about children who are falling behind? So some children may arrive in school with, less knowledge of the language that's being spoken in school, and there are other children who fall behind during school because, they're maybe not able to attend school so much. Maybe Jaime, if I can just turn to you because this is something that the GEEP panel has thought about in other contexts. We didn't talk about it so much today, but given there are several questions about it, how do you see this work fitting in with the work that we've recommended elsewhere about, how to solve these gaps that fall with the low-income students doing less well and falling behind?
One quick point, and then others will have ideas related and given their work on the ground. But I think precisely the problem that we face is that with the good kids of the classroom, any method will work, right? So there will be a top 20 or top 30% of kids in any classroom that will learn to read relatively quickly because of the conditions that they have at home, or because they can just be able to grasp the competencies relatively quick. But actually, the problem that we have is that we should not care about that top 20%. What we need to care is about making sure that we have a method that allows absolutely all kids to be able to learn. And actually, what the evidence is showing precisely here in the panel is that, right, is that with an explicit and systematic instruction covering the six areas that Ben was mentioning, actually all kids can learn, right? And that's what the evidence is showing us, that all kids can learn with that. So I think it is extremely important also what Minister Torrendell was mentioning, is that in some cases one could say, well, you can use whatever method you want at the end of the day, but if systems are accountable and teachers are accountable, and then teachers internalize that their job is to make sure that all kids learn, all kids, not the few kids that sit in the front of the classroom, but the all kids who learn. Then actually they will shift towards those methods that really work, right? And actually that's sometimes what you see in the classrooms. I've seen in classrooms that, I mean, they have textbooks with a global method, and then you have the teachers are using in the classroom, right, phonetics and phonics, because that's what they see that works. So it is not a simple process, right? It like Minister Torredera was mentioning also, there is a political economy issue as well, and we need to make sure that all teachers are on board. So in that regard, I mean, this is a process. This is a conversation that needs to be, the volume has to be turned up, right, everywhere, right? And we need to make sure that schools are accountable, right? And the schools really internalize that their responsibilities is to make sure that all kids learn.
Great, thanks. I know that everyone else has thoughts on this question, but I realize we're running behind. So I want to hand over to Nathaniel from FCDO to give us some closing remarks.
Thanks, Rachel, and hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all online. I'm Nathaniel Bevan. I'm the Deputy Director in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, and I oversee our research on education, among other topics. It's been a really interesting discussion to listen to, and this is something that the UK and FCDO are, proud to have played a part in helping the development of what is, increasingly becoming a rigorous evidence base around education and what works. And so I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes reflecting on that, a little bit about where we've come from, but mostly around kind of next steps and where I think we would like to progress to, which resonates a lot with what I was hearing the panelists talk about. I think it is one of the successes in international development has been the investment in rigorous research around what works in education. It has tended to be quite specific interventions, but measured rigorously. And that is the reason that we're able to identify interventions like teaching at the right level, like pedagogy, that we have a reasonable degree of confidence that they're likely to improve learning outcomes. But I think the other factor that's been a huge success in this is the way in which this is actually very measurable, and the work that you have all done. I mean, this has been a kind of very cross-sectoral approach, but the ability to measure literacy rigorously is, I think, often underestimated in terms of its importance. I think, the fact that there are measures like, reading a word correctly, however simple that sounds, has really driven progress. And, we've seen that in places like Kenya, where we're able to, the government there has looked at a variety of approaches and is able to test very specific outcomes like that. And it's a very powerful measure for governments, for the public, and for parents. And so I think, that whatever we do going forward, I think retaining that clarity, I think is really, really important. There are big choices now, though. I think as we increasingly get a stronger body of evidence around what works, there are just increasing choices to make in terms of how we then implement that. And you've heard a lot of those today on the panel, which I thought was really interesting, because whilst the evidence is strong, it is, as I said, quite it tested often in quite specific contexts repeatedly, but it does leave a lot of choices open. And so I think those are around sort of implementation questions, really. Things like language of instruction, the benchmarking of programs at a national level to identify what works, and the way in which those implementations often raise particular questions for governments around very practical things on curriculum reform, timetabling, elements like that, which are less well tested. So I think the publication of this paper is a real call to action. It highlights that government leadership from the start is the absolute key to success. It stresses the centrality of teachers in successful programs, and there's just an increasing body of evidence around what works in that and the support to teachers. I think the alignment of education and finance policies, which I've heard a lot of today, is critical. And then the last thing around, as I kind of touched on, the context, local language, which is highly context specific. So I think the last bit of kind of where we go next this is really thinking about the job's not done on, there's a lot more in terms of rigorous testing of specific interventions, but I think there's also a big gap around implementation science, and to look at all of this diversity of education systems and societies and how we scale successfully. And that is something that FCDO is committed to, but it does take a partnership at the World Bank, Gates, UN, and through our What Works Hub on Global Education, and other initiatives to really do in many ways what we've done collectively on improving the evidence about these specific interventions to looking at this systems work. So I'll end there, Rachel. Just a massive thank you, and I want to say, as a co-convener on Global Education Advisory Panel, FCDO is really grateful also to UNICEF and the bank and the authors of this research and the presenters, but particularly I do sort of attend and speak at a lot of these events, and the thing I always say is we need to do this much more with policymakers and much less with researchers. So I'm really grateful for all the government representatives who've been here today giving their insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And just to say that, as I say, a lot of questions about different aspects of education that have come up. And I want to remind everyone that this is just one of the reports that the GEEAP panel has put out. So things like the role of parents is addressed in other reports that we've put out. So we're just sharing a number of the reports here that you can download, including the one that we launched today, but really see them as a set of different on the different aspects of education. So thank you everyone for joining, and please do dig into the great work that's been done by these authors.